Get your lights out, get your lights out, get your lights out, get your lights out.
Go.
Hit him. Where the fuck's the door? Over there. Go.
Snatched from their cells in maximum security prisons across America, some 40 members of the infamous Aryan Brotherhood gang are flown to fortress jails in Los Angeles. This is the biggest criminal case in US history, with more than 20 defendants facing the death penalty. The most feared and deadly white gang in the American prison system, it stands accused of hundreds of beatings and killings, of intimidation, racketeering, and drug dealing. Helped by an array of federal forces, prosecutor Greg Jessner spent years using every trick in the book in an obsessive quest to bring the Brotherhood down.
These are the smartest, the toughest, the savviest, the most ruthless inmates.
We control everything. Who lived where? Who died and who lived? We controlled the entire prison system.
In prison, you know who the most powerful people are, and the Aryan Brotherhood were among the most powerful for a simple reason. They'd kill you.
By following a trail of drug deals, murders, hit notes disguised by invisible ink, and secret codes, investigators revealed a unique criminal empire run from behind bars, one that controlled a major part of the prison system. So how does society deal with its outlaws, men who live and die by their own warrior code? For the first time, Brotherhood members reveal their side of a disturbing story. John Greshner, once a national commissioner of the gang, now serving life for kidnap and murder.
If you bring the ruthlessness and extreme violence to a situation 1 or 2 times, you don't have to do it no more. The message gets out.
George Harp, founder member of the gang who served 40 years in jail.
I knew 40 or 50 that were killed by some members of the Aryan Brotherhood in some time, in one prison or another.
Your loyalty to the Aryan Brotherhood has to be more than your loyalty to your best friend, your family. If they see that your loyalty's strayed, you're next.
A few times I've always been ready to kill somebody. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
The Brotherhood's reign in hell began during the 60s among the racial tensions and violence of California's prison system.
At the time, the AB served a much-needed purpose in California state prisons. There was a lot of racial upheaval, and the AB was designed and structured to more or less protect and defend the weaker whites. It started with a purpose and reason and did make sense for the prison system at that time.
The Aryan Brotherhood is not, it's not a white supremacist organization like the Aryan Nations or something like that. I mean, it started out with obviously a racial orientation, but they've traditionally been allied with the Mexican mafia, and also they have had alliances even with black criminal organizations, and that's just more about furthering the interests of the gang.
It evolved to get power, like anything, evolves. First for racial solidarity, and secondarily for money and power and status in that world,
To get that money and power, the Brotherhood soon learned to manipulate the system and conscript the help of their own jailers.
Some of the guards backed the whites because the blacks were killing guards, and so their sympathies went towards the whites. And they kind of an unholy alliance. It wasn't all of them, or, but some,
The guards, some of them liked us. They identified with the things that we stood for, and some didn't. Sometimes we'd ask them if they would like to make some money. They didn't get paid much. And they said, yeah, well, we'll send a package to you. Have somebody mail a package. That'd be okay. You'll bring that in for us, and we'll give you $500 every time you do that. And guards, a lot of them made a lot of money that way.
They brought us weapons, and they brought us information, too. And they would bring us pocket knives. Every time we went to recreation or every time we went to the shower, it was the guard's duty to come into the cell and inspect that cell to look for contraband. And there was many times we would come back into the cell and the guard would say, just look under your pillow. And there'd be a pocket knife.
They used those knives to fight a war on an almost daily basis in the prison yard, part of the constant struggle for power between ethnically divided gangs. It was from these gang wars that the Aryan Brotherhood derived its name, wars that have continued to this day.
So what you have behind the prison wall really is a time capsule of racial prejudice and segregation. I think the prison system is quite pleased with the way things are because it helps them to line up the usual suspects more easily. And they can identify the animosities between individual groups, and they look differently and they're easier to distinguish.
People wonder, how do you know who's in a gang and who's not? It's very simple. You go to the dining hall, they all sit together. The Aryan Brotherhood always sat in the very back part of the mess hall, and that's how you knew who was in it and who wasn't in it.
So if somebody new comes into the penitentiary and starts sitting with this group, well, you know he's either an associate or he's a member. Also, they have certain signs. The AB has clover. They all have different tattoos.
When a new member comes in, then he gets a tattoo. And the design of the tattoo, it's a shield with a swastika, and it had the letters AB on here. Once you got that tattoo, that meant that you were in. It's a sign that you've been accepted into this group, that you're part of this group, and you're in it for life.
What made the Aryan Brotherhood so unique is all these other gangs, the Mexican Mafia, the Black Guerrilla Family, they counted on numbers. They attracted as many soldiers as they could. The Aryan Brotherhood did just the opposite. It said, we only want 100 members, but every one of our guys is going to be so vicious. And what they did was brilliant because it represents the inmate code in prison. I will kill you, don't mess with me. And that's what gave them the power.
In the early 90s, prosecutor Greg Jessner began to investigate the Aryan Brotherhood and realized he was confronting a remarkable prison gang.
The Aryan Brotherhood was traditionally very selective, and that set them apart from other prison gangs. They just wanted to maintain the very high quality of their membership. And so, just on the face of it, these are people who would have been highly respected in prison.
One of them is still so securely guarded that no filming is permitted, and his own words are spoken by an actor.
What distinguished us from other gangs was that we went for quality, not quantity. We wanted to channel people with special talents for the benefit of the AB. While the guards ruled the perimeter, we ruled the inside.
A lot of guys, I think, that wind up joining the Aryan Brotherhood and being recruited by them have natural leadership abilities. And unfortunate that those skills and abilities go to that endeavor, but these are guys that would have, had they gone down the right path, would have been leaders in whatever field they went into.
Mark Lilienfeld was a gang surveillance officer and came into close contact with some of the Brotherhood's leaders.
Most of them are much brighter than the average inmate, and they're able to express themselves in a manner that their peers admire, and they're able to control people alone. They have a certain magnetism that other inmates or that other people around them don't possess.
One reason for this respect was the unique course of study the leadership put their recruits through, from Greek philosophy to Oriental classics about the arts of war.
You know, you'd have a in-depth conversation about whether it's political philosophy or general philosophy or what's wrong with the system or what you can do to improve your position where you are. You know, you could get a little intellectual stimulation as opposed to talking about motorcycles.
We studied Sun Tzu's Art of War, Musashi's Book of Five Rings about samurai combat, and Nietzsche, the first existentialist. It was the start of a long, painful learning curve for me.
I was kind of under the impression that more than for you to learn is to see if you can comprehend.
Learning the ways of the warrior was just the beginning for each recruit. He would next be required to live and die by that code.
A guy that we wanted to become a member, and if they wanted to become one, and some of us, me or one of the leaders, would take the guy off and talk to him. Do you want to become an Aryan Brotherhood? There's certain things you got to agree to, and there's no fooling around with this. This is it's forever. You may sometimes be called to make a move on somebody, and that means kill them. There's no two ways about it. It might be a friend of yours, and you've got to do it. You're totally committed to that.
I had to make my bones. I had to kill someone or make sure that blood was let. It was blood in, blood out. You kill to get in, and you die if you leave.
We have to think that the guy is capable of killing someone if he has to. And it was that serious because there were only a few of us. It was our life. We were in a war that was, we could be killed any day. I knew 40 or 50 that were killed by some members of the Aryan Brotherhood in some time, in one prison or another.
Gessner claims the Brotherhood has been responsible for countless stabbings, killings, and physical assaults. Violence was their trademark.
Prison is full of tough guys, but you know, the people who will successfully stage a murder and sneak up behind somebody and stab him in the neck until he's dead. You know, not that many people in prison will do that as readily.
Brotherhood killings had often been swept under the carpet by prison officials. Now they were painstakingly reappraised by Gessner and his team as they pieced together a jigsaw of bloody crimes.
He's still got the knife in his hand right there. That's a good shot. And he just tossed his.
If an inmate kills another inmate in prison, pretty soon everybody in the prison knows who did it. In a way, it makes the cases challenging because a witness comes in and says, I know who did it, and you don't know if you actually saw it or if you just heard it through the prison grapevine. What wasn't ever done before was to look at the Aryan Brotherhood in an organizational sense. There was never an effort to try to put one big case together against, you know, the leadership and a number of the members and a frontal assault on the Aryan Brotherhood. What you were doing was picking off individual members or pairs of members for individual crimes.
If you're in an environment that's a violent environment, sometimes to make a social statement. To make your presence known, you have to be very violent. It's just all there is to it. And sometimes you bring that type of ruthlessness. If you bring the ruthlessness and extreme violence to a situation 1 or 2 times, you don't have to do it no more. Why make an enemy? Why move on somebody and leave your enemy alive so you can come back around and get you or get yours or get your family or whatever? You don't do that. If it's serious enough to move on them, you take them out. And then you do it in such a way where it's so vicious that everybody, even in a violent environment, takes notice. They say, wow, you know, and they step back and they say, don't mess with them because you'll get that. I mean, that's how you control the environments. Then once you do that and people understand it, then you can get down to business. That's how you do it.
Every faction in the prison system that money can be made, the AB had their hand in. And they got 1/3 of every money that was made in the yard. And for that 1/3, they made sure that nobody was harmed outside the circle.
So we started rackets, booking the ball games and putting out tickets and selling dope. We would smuggle in drugs and sell those. We had a loan shark business going in different prisons, and guys would have to pay us usually double. We needed money. A lot of our families outside needed money. I mean, just because you're in prison, you still got to support your wife or something. You got to do something.
The ease with which the Brotherhood leadership was manipulating the system during the 70s compelled prison officials to shift some of them out of California and into federal prisons, where they were thought to be more secure.
I was the first Aryan Brotherhood guy that ever went into the federal system. I stayed in touch with the guys in California through writing letters, and their girlfriends would send me letters, and I'd make phone calls. Pretty soon there were 12 of us. It was wide open. We could move as we wanted to.
The Brotherhood's leaders had controlled California's prisons with their warrior code of violence. Moving them simply played into their hands and expanded their power throughout the prison system.
I think it's part of the human condition to be able to influence your environment. And if you have to band together with a group of people that lean towards violence gets attention. That's the bottom line. Violence gets attention. What's important for people to understand about prison is that the world in prison is nothing like the free world. In other words, there's a completely different moral standard, there's a completely different society within a society. If somebody should assault you, if somebody should take something from you, you have to react immediately and with as much force as you're capable of reacting with.
If you meet a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, you'll know within 5 minutes that this guy's capable of ripping your heart out. It's the intensity, it's the look, it's the dead eyes, it's everything about them.
Some people would talk the talk, but they wouldn't walk the walk. I've seen, you know, quite a few of them that would fold when the shit really got heavy, you know.
It wasn't just brute force they ruled by. The gang's reputation created a psychology of fear.
When you hear a guy screaming, there's a certain sound in the prison, and it reverberates through the whole prison when a guy, a lot of times, will be screaming, and you just can hear it, and you know what's going on, and you may turn a corner and you can smell the blood. It's everybody knows the threat's there. You don't realize how afraid people are in prison. I never knew that.
But the things I've seen in there break your heart. You know, things in there is cruel and sadistic. Aryan Brotherhood's good for that. You know, if you want to play in their game, they're getting you. You know, you ain't running their drugs, they're getting you. You ain't stabbing somebody for you, you're gonna get stabbed.
They believe in multiple stabbings, you know, don't stab a sucker once, just keep stabbing. 35 stab wounds, you know.
It's quick, it's violent, and it's vicious. There's no Queensberry rules here. They rip your throat out, they gouge out your eyes, and it happens, and it's almost a bloodlust, overpowering thing that takes them on. And that comes from deep inside and is fed by anger and hate. And it's also learned at a very young age. If you check the background of most AB members, you'll see they came out from very violent, brutal homes. Violence worked.
If you look at their lives, they all have, you know, mostly the same kind of pattern. You know, they were raised up that way by violent codes and reform schools, and that's what they're taught to be.
There was an infatuation as to how they talked, how they walked, and the respect that they demanded, and the rapport that they had with other people of their same caliber.
Did you like that?
I was infatuated by it. It was like, that's me. I'm gonna be there. These people became my family.
What the AB did was allow me to reinvent myself in prison. It was like becoming a gunslinger, a character from a Louis L'Amour cowboy novel. You chew tobacco and spit.
They drew inspiration from the prison library shelves. Many had adopted the Brand as an alternative name for the Brotherhood. These stories featured dangerous outlaws who dispensed their own brand of tough justice.
I became an alpha male among alpha males. I learned how to knife fight and box. I was hell on wheels.
Mike Thompson helped mastermind an audacious new move inside Chino Prison in 1982. Inmates there, acting as their own defense attorneys in a trial, were able to call Brand members from all over California as witnesses. When they arrived, they held an Aryan Brotherhood Congress to rebrand the gang.
We'd formed a ruling council in Chino Prison in '82 to transform the AB into a criminal racketeering organization, more like the mafia than some dumb prison gang hooked on racial violence and drug abuse. We wanted power, inside and outside the prisons.
So they were all able to meet for days and weeks at a time at California Institution for Men. And during these meetings, much like a legitimate organization would have strategy meetings and deciding on budget and personnel and advertising, they did the same thing. And they laid out some new rules and came down with a new mission and a new task, a new focus for where the organization was going to go. And that was all decided during that time period.
I was voted onto that council with 9 others to govern the AB and redirect its priorities from race to rackets. We had our pictures taken in the yard like a bunch of politicians starting a campaign. We voted for murder, extortion, drugs, racketeering.
And they had to find a way to control members who posed a threat outside the prison walls.
One of the things they did, sort of a first order of business, is what do we do with people who leave the gang and cooperate with the government? And at that time they made a rule that if you couldn't get to that person, some member of the family would be killed.
Unable to hit a Brand member who had betrayed the gang and been spirited away to a safe house by law officers, the leadership gave orders to kill the informer's father on the front porch of his home.
It was a big step, an organized Brand killing outside the walls. We chose Curtis Price as an executioner, as he was shortly to be released on parole. Curtis was honored to be offered the chance to kill for us and had a number of drug connections up in the Eureka area, whom he would contact for weapons. He sent me a letter from there.
That letter was intercepted by prison officials and proved a first crucial step in gaining inside information about the Brand.
This message appears to be perfectly reasonable, but we notice that there is something on the left margin which appears to have been wet and dried again. that suggests the presence of invisible ink. There are a number of kinds, including urine, which I understand they used rather frequently. So we can try to develop that with heat or look at it with this blue light. It says need, contact, witness, problem, could, walk.
It requested permission to kill.
That letter was later used in court, and it led Curtis Price into death row, where he still rots today. As for me, I was turning into a damn monster. I began to look inside myself. This wasn't combat. This was no warrior code. I felt sick with betrayal, self-betrayal. I rolled out. I'm still under guard 24 hours a day, locked in a maximum security jail to protect me from their knives and to protect society from me.
That cold-blooded murder provoked Mike Thompson to become the first major informer in the brand. He revealed what a massive criminal organization the gang was becoming, one that would continue to grow in power and brutality. By the mid-80s, the brand was growing into a mafia-style syndicate in and outside prison. To try and break its power, senior members were locked in isolation cells.
When people are put in solitary confinement, I mean, some people go crazy, but some people adapt and become very clever. And these are people who have adapted and become very clever. A thing that's surprising is you would think that they wouldn't be able to communicate with one another under these circumstances, but it turns out there are lots of different ways to communicate. A lot of prisons, oddly enough, you can speak through the toilets, you can speak through the vents. They have all these ways of communicating with one another. Also, imagine somebody's in an exercise yard which is next to a cell and there's a window. Even if they can't hear one another, they can typically communicate because most of them have some knowledge of sign language. Also, they can just write letters to people on the outside, and they're allowed to do that, although their correspondence is screened, but you can get hidden messages by the screeners.
Decoding those messages wasn't easy. Investigators uncovered a series of complex codes, the most remarkable of which, they claim, comes from a book in the prison library, the writings of the 17th century British spy, Sir Francis Bacon.
The most sophisticated method that we encountered was something called a biliteral cipher. What you need for that is two different alphabets which look a lot like one another but are distinguishable from one another. Like, say, one has little tails on the end of the letters, but they're not that noticeable. They're very subtle.
Realizing it's written in two different styles of handwriting, he could separate those letters with a loop from those without. forming the pattern of A's and B's which Sir Francis Bacon invented for his Elizabethan spy letters. There are 25 combinations of ABs, and each one represents one letter of the alphabet. By going a stage further and replacing these letters with a substitute alphabet, a long and confusing letter finally reveals its short and deadly command. Yet however subtle the code, the sender is still left with the problem of how to get it delivered beyond the prison walls and to the right people.
To serve as messengers to the outside world, the AB had a whole posse of female associates, kind of well-meaning radicals we could manipulate. We called them mules.
One of the wonderful things about this is that they're stuck in the jail. They're in the slammer. I feel like it's great they're behind bars because I'm free. I can walk in there and I can walk out of there. Yep. And they leave me to fuck alone. We get the best end of the deal, that's for sure.
When couriers like these were put under surveillance, they were seen to be delivering not only letters, but also guns and drugs.
We do them little favors and then we get paid real well. We do, and sometimes we get a little extra too, don't we? They don't know about that.
Girlfriends and wives were observed bringing drugs into federal prisons like Leavenworth and brazenly passing them to brand inmates in the visiting room.
This was a visit between an inmate and his girlfriend, and what had happened was she had apparently brought the narcotics in her waistband in her dress. During the process of the visit, she would pull the drugs out of her waistband, she would put them in her hand, and it would stay there for a while, and then eventually she transferred them to the inmate's hands, and he kept them for a while, and then on the video you can see him looking around to see if anybody's watching him. At that point, he takes the drugs and pops them into his mouth and swallows them. Heroin, it was very important to the Aryan Brotherhood because it was probably their biggest source of cash. Heroin in the prison goes for 10 to 20 times what it would on the street, just because of the difficulty in getting it in and the scarcity of it there in the prison.
Drugs in a penitentiary, whoever controls the drugs controls the penitentiary inside. I mean, they rule.
At Leavenworth, the Aryan Brotherhood had virtually controlled whatever went on with the white inmates there at the prison. They controlled the drugs, they controlled the gambling, they controlled any sort of money-making operation that anyone could think of to start up there in the prison. If the Aryan Brotherhood found out that it was making money, they moved in and took over.
Heroin that they would normally use was black or brown, and it was a thick putty. Heroin and methamphetamine are probably the two most popular drugs that were smuggled in and used by Aryan Brotherhood prison gang members. They were both high-profit drugs, easy to obtain, easy to smuggle.
We later on virtually took over the crank market in California. Anybody that made and distributed methamphetamine in California had to pay a price to the Aryan Brotherhood. And 2 or 3 guys refused and they were killed. And so then everybody was no problem. Then they started paying.
At that time, Aryan Brotherhood was making so much money that they didn't want the officers to know exactly where money was going to, so they had post office boxes all over the place.
Talk about a lot of money.
Yeah.
Could you explain that?
All I had was marijuana line, and my marijuana line, personally, myself, I pulled in at least close to $1,500 to $3,000 a week.
Marijuana, heroin, and methamphetamines were now funding brand activities on both sides of the fence. By the late 1980s, the gang had set up their own network of drug laboratories across California. $1 million worth of drugs money was alleged to have found its way into business accounts, which now bankrolled an increasingly powerful network, one that was building new partnerships.
There was an alliance that was formed between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia prison gang. That alliance and that partnership primarily was formed, certainly not out of ethnic love for each other, but out of the narcotics trade and in order to further supply Aryan Brotherhood gang members and associates with narcotics.
Prison officers attempted to stem the tide of drugs, which was now the main source of funds for the brand. A quarter of the prison population was now hooked on heroin. When they moved on inmates secreting drugs inside their bodies, prison officers would find incriminating evidence of other brand activities.
Hey. Yeah, we can come in.
Not just drugs, but letters, coded messages, and even weapons were uncovered. Weapons that could be used to control large parts of the prison population.
That is...
The Aryan Brotherhood, although being less than 1% of the prison population, the membership, they were responsible for 26% of the violent conduct that took place in the prison. And so that's why they were so feared. That's why they were able to intimidate a large portion of the population on a regular basis.
The brand's fearless and successful use of violence and intimidation became legendary throughout the prison service. Inmates across America looked on them as role models and tried to imitate their tactics and organization. In Texas, racist groups formed their own Aryan Brotherhood gangs.
The inspiration came from all the publicity and from what everybody already knew about the Aryan Brotherhood in California. And we didn't have a very, very good intimate knowledge of how the Aryan Brotherhood was. But what we were doing at the time was we were establishing a white supremacist type situation in the Texas prison system.
When we were having trouble with the gangs forming in '84 and '85 particularly, there were 52 inmate homicides, and a great number of them were attributed to the Aryan Brotherhood establishing their foothold in the prison system. One example was a murder at the Darrington unit, where an inmate, a prospect for the Aryan Brotherhood, killed another Aryan Brotherhood member in the day room, just brutally murdered him, and he was 2 months shy of parole.
For one Brotherhood member to kill another in this way broke all the rules of the original California brand, where respect between brothers was paramount.
It was described to me by one Aryan Brotherhood member that it was almost sexual to him to kill someone. He got his thrills from it. It was almost as good as sex, he once said one time.
For years, prison guards had been content to watch gangs fight it out, but now those gangs were getting out of control. So Texas took the extreme step of isolating Brotherhood members from other inmates.
Everybody that was a known gang member was eventually found and placed into segregation. So there we sat there like in a zoo for years and years and years.
I was tough on inmates. I was firm but fair. Here's the deal. This is reality therapy. You're here. You're going to do your time, and this is how you're going to do it. I'm going to tell you when to shit. I'm going to tell you when to get up. I'm going to tell you when to go to work. I'm going to tell you when to eat, and I'll tell you when you get to shit again.
When all the wardens had to come through segregation at least once a day, and people would tell Leslie Woods, the food is cold. We're getting cold food every day. The guards are spitting in our food. They're pissing in our drinks and things like that. And this happened quite frequently. And he would just tell us that his concept was to treat inmates like mushrooms. Just feed them shit and keep them in the dark.
It's a legal zoo. It's a very hostile environment. We America's criticized for its prisons because people think that we treat them horribly. Well, we don't. It's just it's the nature of the beast. Prison is a very different sort of thing. It is its own society, and as a society, America wants people locked up. They want you to lock them up and throw away the key. We don't want to hear about what goes in the penitentiaries. We pay our taxes. We don't want them out here on the streets, so lock them up.
Brutal isolation became the tactic for dealing with the brand throughout the prison service. But the most notorious case in the entire American prison system is Thomas Silverstein. Wrongly convicted, he first killed in prison after joining the brand. 25 years later, he is still the devil incarnate for the federal prison system.
He murdered 3 convicts in prison, but that's not what got people upset. What got people upset was when he murdered a correctional officer. So the Bureau of Prisons said, how can we keep them from doing this? And the answer is what they called no human contact. Take everything away. They stripped Silverstein down to his boxer shorts, put him in a cell, had the lights on 24 hours a day, gave him nothing. Food, air, space. That's all the Constitution called for. In their view, they put an animal in a cage, and they never want to open that door, and they never want to let him out.
He is kept, I believe, in the most restrictive conditions of any federal inmate. For a long time, they had him in the basement at the penitentiary at Leavenworth, the closest thing to Hannibal Lecter type status that we have in the federal prison system.
They push people where they react like I did, and then they accuse us of being killers and maniacs, but they don't tell you what leads up to all that. They don't tell you about how they called you all kinds of names, mess with you, and had you all chained down and sprayed mace in your face and hit you on your nuts and took clubs and beat you. You just can't do that to people year after year after year, day after day after day, and have under that kind of pressure and not expect something to explode. No man's got pride over if he's a prisoner or not.
The treatment of Tommy Silverstein, it's to do only one thing, and that is inflict psychological damage as a form of punishment. And that I don't think should be within the repertoire of a civilized society.
Locked in solitary confinement and with little hope of rehabilitation, Brotherhood members faced the prospect of life in a concrete hell.
My life is that of a monk in his cell, full of prayer and discipline. And I organize each day with a precision that just about preserves my sanity. I endure what I endure so that I can say when they release me, I survived.
How do people stay locked up for 17, 25, 30, 40 years? I really don't know the answer to that. All I can tell you is that the people who have achieved that and have not fallen prey to mental illness truly are some of the strongest individuals on this planet. It's just unfortunate that that ability is wasted.
Two striking cases point up this waste of human potential. Rick Flinger, after an unexpected release, has become a respected writer and teacher. Eddie Bunker, once one of the youngest and most violent inmates in San Quentin, became a Hollywood actor in Reservoir Dogs, a screenwriter and novelist adored by the stars.
I prevailed, I got out, you know what I mean? I got away, you know. Things are worse than ever in prisons. They're harder, there's no programs, there's, you know, they're crowded. They got 160,000 people in prison in California.
So what has the prison service done with its most dangerous inmates? Men who for years have committed unprecedented levels of violence which the authorities failed to contain. They locked them down for 23 hours a day, but that only added fuel to the fire.
God, you motherfuckers impressive!
Extreme measures used against disruptive prisoners have often only fueled the problems they were intended to diffuse. Violence provoked more violence. From the mid-90s, Brand members continued to intimidate and kill.
Get down! Get out!
The orgy of violence for which the Brand was responsible was creating growing unrest. Not just among prison officers, but also among Brand members locked away in increasing numbers. Many felt the old aims and disciplines of the gang had become distorted and confused.
You would get a wire saying, you know, you got to hit that dude, and then you get a wire from another person saying, no, there's a red light, don't hit that guy, and you got to make a call. You know, and these guys are both brothers, and you don't know what to do. You can end up in the mix and getting hit yourself, and I've seen people get hit for pretty dumb stuff.
In a lot of cases, a lot of dudes got booked or hurt behind other people thinking in their own mind that they were snitching or debriefing, or, you know, one thing leads to another, and he ain't no good, get rid of him. I just put a green light on that guy.
Informers, often disillusioned and isolated, increasingly turned to Gessner and his team with stories of abuse of power and cynical killings. Their testimony would later prove crucial.
Almost any time somebody drops out of the Aryan Brotherhood, they'll tell the prison authorities, by the way, there are weapons hidden here, 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 and here. They always are privy to secret information, and they can always tell us things that we wouldn't have found out otherwise. You look at who ends up getting killed by the Aryan Brotherhood. A lot of times it's Aryan Brotherhood members who've fallen out of favor.
I'll give you the case of Art Rufo, who was a longtime AB here at Pelican. I tried the person who murdered him, and that person told me that he had been convinced by the higher ABs that Art Rufo was a rat. And he said, but when I heard them laughing and saying how they got me to do it and that he wasn't really a rat, then it dawned on me that I'd killed my best friend, whom I'd been in the cell with for years, and for nothing.
I remember I strangled one guy who they thought he was a child molester, and he spousal abuse, but I strangled him, and yeah, I felt pretty bad about that. I mean, I don't think he had that coming. I think he just barely hit his wife.
I've seen people shot, set up by cops, you know. I've seen them stabbed. You know, I've seen them thrown off tiers 5 stories high. I've seen them jump, you know, and I've seen kids in the system hang themselves. I was that kid once.
Confronted by evidence of 40 years of murder and intimidation, Greg Gessner combined forces with the FBI, the sheriffs, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms to round up Brand members inside and outside of prison. Until now, crimes by the Brand had been prosecuted on a one-by-one basis, but Gessner used the RICO Act, designed to take down major crime syndicates like the Mafia. He'd use it ruthlessly against those he believed were leaders of the Brand.
Pretty much from the start, I realized that the logical way to attack this case was to use the RICO statute. RICO was designed to allow you to prosecute an organization that's engaged in organized crime, and that's an apt description of the Aryan Brotherhood.
And it was a brilliant idea. Let's use the RICO Act, and what we'll do is we'll throw out a really big net. We'll not just go out there with a lure and catch one fish at a time. We're going to throw out this huge purse seine, and we're going to bring them all in, and then, gosh, we'll kill them if we can.
Government prosecutors are now demanding the death penalty for half the Brand members they've flown to the biggest ever criminal trial in the United States. But even if they succeed in killing the old leadership, Within a prison system structured around ethnically divided gangs, who will fill the power vacuum and form the next Aryan Brotherhood?